Hello everyone, my name is Sergio Mejia. I'm an Environmental Engineer Specialist 1 here with the Engineering Review Unit. So today I'll be presenting on the Drinking Water Approval to Construct, ATC and Approval of Construction AOC process. So let's take a look at the outline for today. So there are three main topics we'll be going over. We'll look at the ATC Approval to Construct, Exemption, Approval of Construction, AOC, and then we'll finish off with the summary. So we'll be delving into the Arizona Administrative Code for each topic, along with some examples. And then before we begin, I would like to make it clear that the ATC is seen as the first step in the process before construction. And after construction is completed, the AOC is seen as the second step in the process. So it's kind of split into two phases. And then we'll delve into the exemption process, which does exempt you from plan review, but we'll go over the qualifications in more detail. So let's begin with the ATC phase. So per the Arizona Administrative Code, R18-5-505, construction should not start on any water system before receiving an ATC permit. So as seen in the highlighted portion, any change, modification, or addition will need to go through review and proper testing before any water component can be operated. So before construction begins, ADQ will need to ensure local guidelines are incorporated into the design of these new facilities. So continuing with R18-5-505, a complete ATC application includes the completed ATC application, the design report, analyses of a proposed new source of water. So it's specific to the type of water component. So whether that be treatment or construction of a well, which we'll go into more detail, and then other pertinent data required to issue the approval to construct. So the more data or documents that we have during the review process, the better, and it helps us understand more the design of the project. So furthermore, so proper verification of the documents should be provided. So continuing on with the rule, the ATC app only requires the applicant and applicant's agent signature. So usually the applicant might be the public water system owner, and the applicant's agent is usually a consultant. And then the construction plans and design report require the professional engineer's seal and signature. So the seal must include the signature and date signed once everything is completed. And then the seal must be on each sheet of the construction plans. And then for the design report, it's only required on the cover page or somewhere on the report. So here we can see an example of that. It's a kind of seal that we see on the construction plans and design report. So to sum up everything, the needed documents are the ATC application, the design report, the construction plans, which are stamped by a professional engineer, and the review fee. So the review fee varies on the component type, but when an ATC application is submitted, we double check to make sure the appropriate fee is calculated, and then we send an invoice. And then lastly, a water service agreement is needed for construction of subdivisions. So this form is basically an agreement between the consultant and public water system to allow use of water. So however, this does not only apply to subdivisions, it also applies for other water components. So typically we require some form of a letter from the public water system, but if the public water system is the applicant, then the water service agreement is not needed. And so now we'll be going over the different types of water facilities that need an ATC permit. So these are the facilities that require an ATC permit, such as a water line, well, a storage tank, the water treatment, so which includes the chlorinator, blending, UV, booster pumps, and hydropneumatic tanks or pressure tanks. Each facility is reviewed according to the type of function it serves in the public water system. So as an engineering reviewer, we follow the guidelines and rules set forth in the Engineering Bulletin number 8 and 10, the Arizona Administrative Code, American Water Works Association, and local standards set by the county. And so next we'll jump into what is needed for each water component to obtain that ATC permit. So here are the documents needed for a Waterline ATC approval. So that ATC application completely filled out, a design report that includes the hydraulic analysis and model. So we look for the different demand flow scenarios, such as average daily demand, peak daily demand, maximum daily demand, and then also fire flow with peak daily demand, just to ensure that the water lines are being constructed appropriately and they're meeting the minimum requirements of 20 psi at all demand flows. And then the calibration method, which is a really important step. So usually what we see for the calibration method is a fire flow test, which takes a nearby fire hydrant. They test the residual static and pitot pressure, and they use those pressure points to provide that calibration for the hydraulic analysis model. So at the design report, though it includes, the description and then the proposed construction of the water line, you really look at the hydraulic analysis and make sure that it's completed and that it is appropriate for that design. And then moving on to the construction plan, we look at the water line and its four aspects, looking at the valves and looking at the depth from the ground to where it's buried and checking up on all the requirements for the water line. And then the water service agreement, and it must be filled out, but if it's the public water system as the applicant, then it is not needed. And so some common deficiencies that I would like to point out for waterline applications, it's usually that the ATC application is not completely filled out. So there are some sections on there that are not filled out. So when it pertains to a waterline, we like to see that it's completely filled out and all the necessary information is on there. And another deficiency is usually that the hydraulic analysis is not calibrated. So sometimes it's just ran just based on a given demand flow that was taken from the public water system, and then a hydraulic analysis is used. But we like to see that it's verified through a fire flow test or any other kind of calibration method. And then another deficiency we see pertaining to construction plans is that it's missing a standard detailed drawing. So the detailed drawings that we look for on the construction plans are the fire hydrants, air release valves, and waterline trench or bedding details, and then also the blow-off valves. So now let's look at what is needed for a well ATC approval. So again, that ATC application that's filled out completely. And then for the design report, we look for that pump curve that is usually provided with the specifications for the pump that's provided. Usually we see, that manufacturer pump curve taken out and included in the design report, which is totally fine, as long as you're able to explain and provide details as to why the pump is situated for that flow. And then the construction plan, we look for the plan and profile view of the wellhead just to get an idea of the types of components that are associated with that well. And then importantly, the new source analysis. So it must be completely filled out and signed by the laboratory. The new source analysis can be submitted during the ATC phase, but it can also be submitted during the AOC phase. Typically, we see it submitted during the ATC. It ensures that the well is free of contaminants, that there's no contaminants over the MCL. But if it can't be completed with the ATC phase, then we do allow it to be submitted with the AOC. There is a bit of concern there. If there are exceeding contaminants, we may have to delay the process and get those fixed before issuing that AOC permit. But we will go over that in more detail later. And so some common deficiencies here is just missing that analysis of the pump curve. The construction plan did not include that plan or profile view, or missing some component details on the well. Some typical ones are usually those shutoff valves, pressure relief valves, or flow meters. And then the new source analysis is incomplete, or it is more than a year old from the original sample date. So when that does occur, we do require resampling of total coliform, nitrate, and nitrite to be submitted. And now let's look over the storage tank requirements for an ATC approval. So again, that ATC application completely filled out. And then the design report, we do look for the storage capacity calculations, making sure that the amount of storage is appropriate for that water system, whether it's a small, medium, or large water system. And then the specifications for that storage tank. And then the construction plan, we look again for that plan and profile view to make sure that all the required components are associated with that storage tank. And then, so some common deficiencies for found in storage tank applications are just missing those specifications. So to be more specific, those tank details and dimensions, just to get a better understanding of what is being constructed. And then missing that plan and profile view, it's really important. We really go into detail in our review and make sure that everything is designed appropriately. So some components that are usually missing for storage tanks are those overflow drains, especially the mesh that covers that pipe should be a number 16 mesh for those overflow drains. And then a sampling tap at the discharge. It typically is at the discharge, but it can be, the sampling tap can just be attached to the storage tank as long as it gives a representative sample of the entire storage tank, so we can get a better analysis of the water if needed. And now let's look at the requirements for the water treatment. And so we have, again, the ATC application, and then in the design report, we're really looking at the specification of the treatment or the disinfection component. And then we really hone in on the water quality analysis. And when the treatment is being installed, usually it's because there's an MCL or a water system is planning ahead and looking at their results from their monitoring plan and seeing an increase in some sort of contaminant. So they want to prevent, exceeding those MCLs or contamination of their water. So we really look at the water quality analysis and make sure that the proposed treatment is going to target those contaminants and make sure that the water is clean and safe after treatment. And then construction plan, again, really looking at those plan and profile views. Some construction plans just take those manufacturer drawings and include it in their drawings and maybe add some components that we ask for and things like that. And then it is important to note that each treatment type may require more data or information than others. So usually the more documentation and details, the better. And then so some common deficiencies for treatment are that they were missing those specifications of the treatment type. If there's not enough information, it's really hard to tell what's being treated or how the proposed treatment is going to affect the water quality. So we really want to make sure that we have all those necessary details. And then also there isn't a water quality analysis provided. So we like to see that water quality analysis before and after treatment installation. So those are usually done with some kind of test of a pilot test or some other analysis that can be provided. And now we'll look at the booster pumps and hydro tank requirements. So again, back to that ATC application, make sure it's completed for that type of component. And then the design report, we're looking at the pump curve, which is usually provided with the manufacturer manual. You can take that, include it in your report, just explain it in detail. And then the specifications of the pump that and the reason why we ask for these specifications is because we include it in the ATC description when we issue the permit and making sure that it is there and that we know what kind of components are used. And then the construction plan, again, the plan and profile view is important to make sure that you're meeting the requirements. And then some common deficiencies are the incorrect payment for the fee. So we charge per component. So if there's 4 booster pumps, the fee is per booster pump. So the charge for a booster pump is 800 for review. So it's 800 times 4. And so that is how we charge the fees for booster pumps. And then usually they're missing specifications. So again, if you have those manufacturer manuals or anything related to what's being installed, include those in the design report. It helps the review process be a lot smoother and avoid those deficiency letters. And then missing that pump curve, as I had mentioned. Okay, so now we'll get into a Waterline ATC example. So here's page 1 of an ATC application filled out for a Waterline project. So for section 1, for project information, we look for the project name and a brief description of the project. As you can see here, it's an on-site water distribution line. It's a subdivision. There's this one's for parcel 2, so there's probably a variety of parcels. And then it is about 3,800 linear foot of 8-inch dip water line. And then we also look for section 2, 3, and 4 to be completely filled out. So the applicant, which is usually might be the public water system or some kind of developer for a subdivision. We look for the name, the phone number, the firm to be filled out, the title, a vice president here in this situation, the mailing address in case we need to mail anything out, and most importantly, that email address. So same thing for the applicant's agent, which is usually that consultant or engineer, a professional engineer in this matter, the name, their title, all their contact information, and then their Arizona BTR number here, just to make sure we can check their status and make sure that they're an active PE and not in suspension or anything like that. And then also looking at the operator information, other information included on there. And then for most water projects, section 5 should be completed just to give us a better idea of the project area in case we need to look at the surrounding area. If it's, for example, included in a 100-year flood zone, we can look at that and include that in our review and make sure that they're meeting those requirements. So moving on to page 2, section 6 can be number of service connections. So for this project, it is 83 service connections. It's 83 residential, and it's single family service connections. So this helps us out, especially with the ATC description. We usually include this information on there. Subsection B just gives us an idea of the total population to be served. This is a number we can take a look at when we're reviewing the hydraulic analysis. And then subsection C, which goes over the design flow of the system. And so as I had mentioned about that hydraulic analysis, here we have the average design flow in gallons per day, also converted in gallons per minute, and the pressure in PSI, and the peak daily demand flow in gallons per day and per minute, and the PSI. And then another important aspect of it is the required fire flow. So for a single family subdivision, the required fire flow should be 1,000 gallons per minute for a duration of 2 hours at a minimum 20 PSI. And then we also look at the fire flow and peak daily demand, which is in gallons per minute at the pressure given. And then subsection D just gives us an idea of the total amount of water line that's going to be included for the kind of project. So here we have the diameter of 8 inches, the total length of water line that's going to be constructed, and the material, which is ductile iron pipe. And so when we do our review, we look for this to be similar to the material and quantities list, which is on the construction plan. So if these don't match, it usually falls, it usually goes into a deficiency letter, and we have to get that corrected just to make sure you know the correct amount of water line that's being constructed. And then here, just showing you a quick example of a completed ATC application that's been signed and date by the owner and the applicant's agent here. And so here, I want to just kind of delve into a well example of a construction plan. And so you can take a look at the general notes first. Just kind of go over the main general notes that we look for. So we do look for that any water component that comes in contact with water conforms to the National Sanitation Foundation 60 and 61. So we look for that note. If it's not there, we include that in that deficiency letter. And then you also look that the minimum pipe cover is 3 feet. This pertains to engineering bulletin number 10. We look for the pressure and leakage test note, which is right here. And then we look for the proper disinfection that will occur after construction, which is right there. So these are the notes that we look for in the construction plans, whether it's a water line, storage tank, well, treatment. So just make sure that this is included in your construction plans. And then we also look for the basis of bearing to give us a better idea of where the project is located. And as I had mentioned, that materials and quantity list is typically for a water line, but here is just an example. We could see it's an 8-inch steel well casing, 385 feet, and it just list any components that's associated with the project. And then, so as I was saying, so for, those projects that include that plan and profile view. So here's a plan view of a well. So here we have some details showing us what is included, and then also the numbers that give us an idea of what it is. So if we look at 10, we can go over here and see that it's an emergency chlorination tank. If we want to know what this is, we can look at number 1 and see that it's the concrete slab that must be included on a wellhead. And then, so that is good. It shows us what's included. We can look at these components and check them and ensure that it's being designed appropriately. We also look for that site location, which is here, and a vicinity map, just to give us a better idea where that project is located. So this is kind of a typical cover page that we might see. That engineering stamp located here, and so this would pass during our review. And so we saw that plan view. Now here's a profile view, just giving us a better idea of what's included. This is a better close-up of all the components included with the wellhead. So if we look at item 4, we're checking for that air release valve, which we can look for number 4, which is here. That's included. And so, during our review, we check for these components to be included. So we always look for that flow meter. We can see that on there, and making sure that it's being designed appropriately. And so that will ensure that, the construction plan will pass our review process. So per the Arizona Administrative Code, the review is under a licensing time frame, and it basically measures the total time to complete a review of an application. So the internal goal for our engineering review unit is 15 days to complete that review. This is usually met when there are no deficiencies on the application. So when there are deficiencies on the application, a deficiency letter is sent to the owner and engineer with an explanation of the items that will need to be corrected for approval. The deficiency letter is sent with a deadline that is set based on the amount of deficiencies found and just based on the complexity of the project. We usually give about 15 or 30 days. Sometimes it may be less or more to complete those deficiency corrections. And we're always there to help as well. We just don't send those letters out and just let you deal with it. If you ever have questions about some of our comments, you can always reach out to us. And so one way we can help you avoid these minor deficiencies and just help you develop a better application is to conduct a pre-application meeting, which is done virtually. So before submitting an ATC application, the applicant can request a pre-app meeting where we can discuss project details, ask each other questions, and explain the process in better detail. And then, as you can see, this can be scheduled at our group email that is monitored daily. So here at WQD_DWSER@azdeq.gov. So when you send that email asking for a pre-app meeting, we will reply back with dates that we are available to meet. And once you select that date and time, we will send you a Google Meet invite, which will be done virtually. So we'll have that date scheduled. We'll have our time blocked off, so you can count on us to be there unless we're sick or something unfortunate happens. But we will be there, and we'll conduct that pre-app meeting and get any questions answered that you may have. So now we'll take a little detour and go over the exemption process per Arizona Administrative Code R18-5-505 B3 and 4. But before we begin, I want to clarify that not every project can be exempt from plan review. We will look at the rule, qualifications, and items needed for the exemption. So per R18-5-505 B3, the rule states that a project can be exempt from plan review as long as it is in compliance, and the structural revision, addition, or extension or modification has a project cost under $12,500, or is a water line that is not for a subdivision, a project cost of more than $12,500 but less than $50,000, and has a design that is sealed and signed by a PE registered in Arizona. So upon completion of a project for exemption, the public water system must submit a fair market value cost estimate of the project, which includes those receipts and invoices, the name of the design and review engineer, and the project completion date and total construction time. So this pretty much sums up the Arizona Administrative Code rules for exemptions. And so I'll go in more detail of what is expected for the ADEQ exemption process. So first, let's look at the qualifications for exemption. You must be an existing public water system and must be in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, or at least making progress towards compliance. But this does not include public water systems with MCL violations, mismonitoring, or open cases. So it's not a segue to if the public water system is not in compliance for them, they need to get a project moving. They can't just go through the exemption process. They have to be in compliance first. The water line must not be for a subdivision, and projects cannot be split to meet the exemption requirements. So meeting these qualifications does not always guarantee exemption from plan review, but these are the basic requirements that allow for the opportunity to be exempt from the ATC and AOC process. So before moving on, the exemption process can be viewed in two parts. So the first one as a pre-exemption and the second as post-exemption. So per the Arizona Corporation Commission, a pre-approval is required before going through exemption review for certain projects. This phase is called pre-exemption, which is not required by rule, but can be utilized to determine if the project will meet requirements. So as seen, limited information is needed for pre-exemption approval. Upon approval, a pre-exemption letter will be sent authorizing the public water system to move forth with the exemption process. So as we can see, all that is needed for a pre-exemption review is a description, location, and date of the project. And then also, just providing those estimated cost of materials, labor, and equipment for that project. So after construction, or also known as post-exemption, for this case, a project that is $12,500 or less will need to provide the following items. So providing that description, location, and date of the project. The second bullet point is usually done during the pre-exemption, but we will review to make sure that it's not for a subdivision. The fair market value, so that includes all the material, labor, equipment, and it's supported with invoices and receipts or other proof of payment. And then the name of the design and review engineer does not have to be a professional engineer in this case. The construction completion date and total construction time. And then next we will go over what is needed for the post-exemption when the cost is between $12,500 and $50,000 range. So the documents needed are relatively the same, but the main difference is that a construction plan is needed with the signature and seal by a registered professional engineer in Arizona. So after meeting the requirements for post-exemption, we will issue a post-exemption letter stating that the project has been exempt from plan review and met the requirements set forth by the Arizona Administrative Code. So we took a slight detour from the ATC and AOC process, but we are back on track, and we will go over the approval of construction phase, which is done after the ATC permit has been issued and the project has been constructed. So this is the second and final phase of the ATC and AOC process. So per the Arizona Administrative Code R18-5-505, an approval of construction must meet the requirements of a completed certificate of completion or AOC application. It's signed and sealed by PE registered in Arizona. The record drawings conform to the approved plans and specifications from the ATC phase. An operations and maintenance manual has been approved, which is based on the project type specific to treatment and disinfection, and have a certified operator. And furthermore, the record drawings or known as as-built as well, should accurately record or mark each deviation from the original construction plans, reflecting the project as actually built. So the PE signature and seal should be on each sheet of the record drawings, and quality control testing results and calculations should be submitted along with the AOC application. So a common deficiency for the record drawings is that there is not a PE seal and signature affixed to each sheet. So the markups are usually reflected on the original construction plans. So after construction, the PE should seal and sign each sheet of the record drawings to ensure the project was constructed according to the approved plans. So in general, most of the water components will need the following documents: the AOC application, which is signed and sealed by the professional engineer registered in Arizona, the record drawings, which is signed and sealed by that PE in Arizona as well on every sheet, the pressure and leakage testing results, the disinfection testing results, BACT test results, and the operation and maintenance manual. There is a section in the AOC application for the pressure and disinfection and BACT tests that can be filled out, but we also accept those testing results to be attached to the application as long as it is accurate and signed by the responsible person. The operation and maintenance manual will need to be updated based on the treatment type and operations plans. So here an example of a Waterline AOC application. So as we can see, kind of similar to the ATC application, you need the project name and project description. It should be exactly similar as the ATC application. The ADQ file number, which is issued with that ATC permit, and that LTF number, which is issued with that ATC permit. And then on that ATC permit, we'll have the date of completion. The date of completion is when the project was completed and constructed, when it was finally inspected, who inspected the project. So in this case, the engineer signing this form, or it can be an inspector. The proposed startup date, just to giving us an idea of when the project may be in operation. And so section 2 and 3 is the applicant information, as we had kind of went over in the ATC application. Just similar situation, just making sure that all of this information is filled out completely. The engineer information and the certified operator that will be operating the facility. And then here is the part of the most important page of the AOC application. So let's begin with the top. So it shows the appropriate testing that needs to be completed during the AOC phase. So the BACT test results. So we have the date completed, the equipment, the station is station, this is for Waterline, and the result is that it's absent for total coliform and E. coli. And so it's on a pass and fail basis, so it's pass for both. And then we can look at the pressure test data. So here, the pressure and leakage test results, it's a pass and fail basis, so they both passed. The date tested, done on a 2-hour time frame. The pipe diameter that was tested, 8-inch in this case. The footage tested. The allowable leakage, the leakage observed, which is 0. It shouldn't be more than the allowable leakage. The pressure at this test point, and then the name of the employee who observed the test and signature. And then we can get into the chlorination test. So here, the initial sampling minimum should be 50 parts per million. So here we have the date, the time, and the initial sample at 110 parts per million. After 24 hours detention time, the minimum should be 10 parts per million. So we look to make sure that it's 24 hours, so that checks off. The result is 60 parts per million, and 70, which checks off. And then after sufficient flushing, we check the date and time, 0.5 parts per million, that is good. And then the bacteriological sampling, which was done, in this case was attached to the AOC application. So after reviewing these sections, the following pages where the PE registered in Arizona will sign the AOC application and attach the seal to this document. And so after reviewing all the related documents, the review engineer of ADEQ, which would be me, will issue an AOC permit that certifies the approved water component to be activated and put into use. So depending on the type of component, ADEQ will issue a monitoring plan and make the appropriate updates of the water component installed. So once that AOC application is received, then the operation of that water facility can be used and put into operation. So now let's briefly go over the topics we discussed today. So today we went over the ATC phase and learned the requirements that are needed to obtain a permit before construction. We went over the different water components that need an ATC permit and the associated items for approval. We took a slight detour into the exemption process and learned about the rules and qualifications to be exempt from plan review. And remember that it's not always guaranteed. We do make sure that you meet those qualifications and meet the rules for the Arizona Administrative Code. And then we learned about the AOC phase, which certifies the completion of the project that is ready for operation. And after proper testing and review of the record drawings, the AOC permit is issued as a final step in the ATC and AOC process for drinking water facilities. So here are some helpful resources where you can find the ATC and AOC application at the Engineering Review Unit webpage, as well as other useful information. And then please remember we are working remotely and electronic submittals are a priority for us. It makes the process a lot smoother. So you can submit all ATC and AOC applications at that email located right here. And then if you have any general questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email. We monitor this email daily and are willing to answer your questions. And then one last thing, so when you submit an ATC application, we will send an invoice for the review fee. That invoice can be paid electronically at the link provided below here. And then once that invoice is paid, that is when the application is logged in and it is pending review. And with that, this concludes today's presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Sergio. Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have some questions for you. The first one being, is the ATC/AOC process the same for sewer or wastewater projects?
I am not too familiar with the sewer and wastewater projects, but I know that they do include those NOIs and forget what the other documents are, but if you have any questions for sewer and wastewater projects, there is another group email that you can reach out to, and I will include it in the chat.
Thank you. The next question is, referring to what needs ATC approval, is it all water lines or just the mains?
It will be all water lines. So yeah, water mains. We review the water lines up to the service connection. So anything past that point is not part of our review. So yeah, so it's all water lines, whether that be a commercial, for commercial development, subdivisions, or a transmission line as well. So yeah, so all those kinds of water lines.
Okay, and the next question is, what about packaged booster systems for the fees?
Yes, so I probably should have elaborated on that more. So there are those instances where those booster pump packages come as one and serve as one booster pump. So yeah, so we will, like I said, we will evaluate, the project before sending out that fee and making sure that it's calculated correctly, that we don't overcharge or undercharge. So yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis, and we'll make sure that that we'll communicate that with you and get that squared away before we start the review.
Okay, the next question is there a form for the engineers to fill out for this exemption?
Yes, so we are actually working on that. So on the ADEQ, the Engineering Review Unit webpage, there is currently a pre and post exemption checklist. Just kind of gives you a helpful resource to go through and make sure that you have all the required documents prior to submittal. I am actually working on creating an exemption application just to make things a lot easier for you guys. So you guys can look out for that pretty soon.
Okay, and the next question is, on a project that is actively serving customers and has improvements that require an AOC, do you have plans to allow for this without interrupting service?
I'm sorry, can you explain that question again?
So David Dickinson, if you would like to expand on this question, he wrote, on a project that is actively serving customers and has improvements that require an AOC, do you have plans to allow for this without interrupting service? And David, if you would like to expand on this question, please do so.
So if I understand the question correctly, so if there is already an existing component that I guess hasn't been approved with an ATC or AOC, can it still be in operation? So if that's the question, yes, we will work with you to make sure that water is being effectively and is safely delivered to the customers, but we will have to look at the situation and just kind of depend what it might be and how we may resolve that.
Okay, and the next question is, for the engineering review exemption, how does the system know if it is in compliance in order to qualify? You may have answered this already.
Yeah, so to check for compliance, you can go on the Drinking Water Watch page and then check on under violations for the public water system. So under there, you can check to see if they're in compliance or not, and that will ultimately decide if that water system is or not.
Okay, and our last question for today is, what if I want to submit electronically but want to pay with a check? Is that possible?
Yes, that is possible. So you can submit your application electronically, but if you want to send us a check, you can send it through mail. So on our part, just to make sure that it doesn't get lost, we'll make note of that. And so when our mailing department receives that check, we get notified and the accounting department gets notified. So we'll make sure that that check is processed and we'll keep track of that. So to make sure, your check is not lost and it doesn't delay your application.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Sergio, for your presentation. And thank you all for joining us today for today's